I'm going to come back a bit to the technology question in the how you hire, and then I'll talk a little bit about the whom you hire. But it's ironic that what are now called applicant tracking systems, which is the kind of the class or the family of technology for hiring, actually grew up in a sense as a preventative measure to deal with the enormous explosion of online applications that started, 20, 25 years ago. And it made sense, right? Companies were getting just a deluge of applications in the last big growth wave of hiring. And, they were overwhelmed. So technology companies said, hey, we can help you with this. The irony is that, and I suppose in a total boom job market, there's some credibility to the argument, but the applicant tracking systems have grown up to be the systems that too often screen out rather than screen in talent. And I saw a statistic from Society for Human Resource Management who estimates that more than 50% of qualified applicants can't make it past online ATS screening algorithms. And that may be because caregivers have had interrupted work, or young people have had not long-term consistent work, or, even go back further into the system, somebody who's not a native English speaker actually can't even access the technology or can't game the technology algorithms. So what you end up having too often is not necessarily talent, but those who can game the ATS system. So I think that's one problem that we identify. And what we suggest is, well, you can actually change that technology. So you can change the algorithms, you can make alterations, and we make some specific suggestions about that. But you might want to think about other tools for how you hire. So, Steve mentioned earlier untapped talent. And I'll come back to the how in a minute. So when we talk about untapped talent, really what we're talking about is individuals who would like to work or work more or work at a higher level that they're working. And it has been estimated that these individuals, what we might call underemployed or untapped talent, are more than 5 times as larger than the unemployed talent pool. I mean, this is an enormous pool of untapped talent, but they're not necessarily always easy to find and always easy to pull in and to immediately get up to the level of performance that companies may be looking for. But if you think about hiring a little bit differently than just using an applicant tracking system, this is a really rich pool of talent. So, for example, if you're thinking about reaching into communities of English language learners, you might want to think about partnering with organizations who have deep roots in those communities, where, as we know, in different communities, relationships are above all, how people get connected to work. You tap into those relationships, and all of a sudden you're thinking about a really different pool of talent. We'll talk about public policy a little bit later, but if you're interested in caregivers, you might need to think about, well, you're going to have to solve that problem, perhaps at work. And companies have, in fact, it's interesting, when I worked for the mayor of Boston, this was a long time ago, so it was Mayor Flynn, for those of you who may remember that far back in your political history. But one of the very, very first things that we did was we built a childcare center at City Hall. In fact, my older daughter, who is now a mother herself, she was in that first class of kids at that childcare center. It was amazing because caregivers, including my wife and I, we could drop our daughter off downtown. I could drop her before I worked. The mayor had great photo opportunities with little children. Of course, mayors always appreciate that. But it was a way of, it's interesting because the Commonwealth of Massachusetts did the same thing. In fact, my 2 nephews went to the child care center. Massachusetts is the largest employer, the state of Massachusetts, so they did the same thing. So there's a lot of ways for employers to think about reaching into pockets of talent, of working with organizations to rethink how you reach them. There are going to have to be adjustments. So, for example, reaching into an incredibly rich tool of talent in the disability community may require making adjustments and accommodations, but the return is enormous. And we talked in great detail about those opportunities.
Yeah, great. I